everybody. Yeah, I think sometimes the right thing to do is to do nothing really and just observe and think for yourself. I don't know if this t-shirt is extremely relevant to today's topic, but anyway, I think thought it was funny to put it on. I'm going to talk about the mainstream and the gatekeepers of the approved. This world, this life, this existence really is an existence of contrast and polarity. I think actually that is one of the main reasons that we are here on Earth, that we have incarnated into these bodies on this planet, is to experience contrast and polarity. But sometimes this polarity, this polarization really goes too far, and it sucks because it makes us not meet and not understand each other. You all know about this, of course. Everybody's, or most people are really feel bad about the polarization in the world. There's too much polarization. But what they maybe don't realize is that most of them are actually contributing to it unconsciously, because it is so difficult to raise one's view and see things from different angles, because we're almost 8 billion people on this planet, with everybody has his or her own angle of things. So we see things differently, and it's not to say that that group is wrong and that group is right. Sometimes, I mean, that's also a part of the polarity thing, that there's a right and a wrong. Sometimes you might say that, but for the most part, it's actually not that simple. Anyway, I had it starts very, very easily, and we all contribute to it almost without thinking about it. As I said, I have an example here. Just a few days ago, a good friend of mine was commenting the fact that the artist Neil Young has left Spotify. You know, that music streaming service, Spotify. And my friend said that, yeah, well, that was, of course, because Spotify offers a platform for that right-wing extremist. Who's that, I thought. Well, he was referring to Joe Rogan, of course, the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. And you can have any kinds of opinions about Joe Rogan and his podcast. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it even relevant or irrelevant? Is it stupid? It doesn't matter. But everyone who has listened to just a few of his episodes and heard him describe things himself in interviews and things like that, realize that he's not a right-wing extremist. But this is how it starts. This is how it works, you know. Once this narrative is out there and has become the mainstream, the narrative that is approved by the gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers, again, I mean, not again, but the gatekeepers are probably, for the most part, not even conscious that they are gatekeepers. They just think that it's important to keep things clean and clear. But once that narrative is set in stone, chiseled in stone, so to speak, it's very, very difficult to change it and to get out of it. And those who don't follow that narrative, they are considered strange or fringe or even dangerous in extreme cases. So what about me and my podcast, Mind the Shift? What is this? Is this a mainstream podcast, or is it a fringe podcast, even a pseudo thing? Well, talking about myself personally, I think it's a little bit difficult for people to categorize me, and I want it to be that way. I mean, it's not a conscious choice or anything. It's just the way it is. But I think it's natural and good. I mean, those who have followed me, my friends and associates over the years when I've been working as a journalist, they know that the vast majority of the articles that I have written and things that I've done for radio and TV, not so much, but still a little bit, have been about mainstream topics and mainstream issues. I mean, I've been covering politics and economics and science and the environment and things like that, culture, from a mainstream, ordinary perspective. But then I've also always had this kind of esoteric side spiritual trait within me that I've had since I was a child, that we are more than this physical body. I've known that always, but I mean, those are things that you don't tend to talk about with most people because it's considered a bit fringe and it's not in the mainstream. It's not approved by the gatekeepers. But lately, during the last few years, I've been less afraid of, let's say, getting a bad reputation or anything like that, or I'm less afraid of losing a career because I don't have a career anymore. So that's a good thing. And I've been more open about these esoteric things and questions about consciousness and the brain and all those sorts of things. And I've also, as you know, dabbled with the issue of climate change, which I'm pretty knowledgeable about, really, and also this pandemic thing. Perhaps one particular interest that I had when I was a child illustrates a little bit this two-sidedness of me. I was extremely interested in maps, and that's perhaps a male thing. I don't know if you could say that. That's probably prejudiced, but anyway, more boys than girls were interested in maps, at least in those days. It might have changed, I don't know, again, but still it's very scientific. I mean, natural scientific, mainstream scientific to study maps and read maps, and I could read atlases for hours and hours. But then I also drew my own maps. I drew maps, and I drew maps of imaginary lands. I had these imaginary lands and countries that I created in my imagination. So I had an inner life at the same time around this interest that I had in maps and mapping the world. So I conjured up, all kinds of features around these imaginary countries, like their history, their social life, their societies, their languages, their culture, their money, their everything. I just loved doing that for a few years when I was between maybe the age of 7 and the age of 12 or something like that. So that could a little bit illustrate this two-sidedness, some kind of imaginary side and a very hands-on and practical side. On this podcast, I like to make space for what you might call independent researchers. And they're independent because they do studies that most ordinary scientists wouldn't do for different reasons. And the so-called mainstream then points to that and says, look, they're not approved. I mean, they're not writing formally peer-reviewed studies, so they can't be trusted, they can't be relied on. And that kind of self-perpetuates the mainstream, because if the mainstream never opens up for tributaries, for side streams to enter the mainstream, it will never evolve, it will never grow. And that's really, I mean, the whole point of science is to be open all the time to different kinds of possibilities, that every theory is preliminary always. And if these researchers that I was talking about, that I want to make space for here, are independent, that ought to mean that the ones within the mainstream are dependent. It's probably a little bit mean to say that, but in some cases I think it's true, because they are dependent on getting money, funding, of course, and they're dependent on not losing their careers, or they're dependent on, or they're afraid of getting a bad reputation, because that would end their career, and also dependent on groupthink in general. That's human, it's a human trait, it's very common. We all, at some point in some contexts, suffer from this, if I may put it that way. And there are, of course, a minority of scientists, researchers within the mainstream, in the ordinary universities, who are truly honest and who are independent, actually, who think outside of the box, as it's sometimes called. And kudos to them, and kudos to their bosses and their universities who let them stay there. Some even stay for whole careers, for decades, and keep doing independent research within these formal structures, which is great. But for the most part, scientists who are in the mainstream don't do that. The majority don't do that really, and those who are honest and those who are free thinkers, many of them quit early because they can't really stand the pressure that they feel from the outside. That you shouldn't go there, you shouldn't go that path, you should that's not really approved. And those are the gatekeepers that I call the gatekeepers. Those people who are, I mean, often unconsciously doing this. They think they really, I think they honestly think that it would be dangerous to taint, you know, this approved peer-reviewed science with some side tracks. Strange metaphors there, but anyway, a mixture of metaphors. You get my point. It's basically the same thing as what happens within politics. There are a minority of politicians who are really honest and free thinking and want to change things, often in an unconventional way. But they often also quit early because they can't stand this, you know, pressure from the majority and from gatekeepers. Now, the thing is that people like me, if I am a kind of person, even, I mean, but let's say that there is a group of people who are a little bit like me and stay a little bit outside of the mainstream sometimes, and that we are not in the formal mainstream. Let's say that. I don't really like to categorize, but just for the sake of argument and to make it clear what's going on, let's say that. So people like me are, for the most part, very well aware of the mainstream, of course. I mean, we know the mainstream. We have our base in the mainstream. We have started there. We have begun there. I mentioned earlier my career as a journalist. I know all about these ordinary ways of looking at things in politics, in science, in culture, in the economy, in all these areas, and even in the, you know, spiritual realms. What is acceptable or not to write in a mainstream newspaper, for instance, in these matters. So I have my base there, like most of us in this category, if it even is a category. But we are, I mean, of course, just people who are interested in finding out what's true and finding out new information. We are curious about the world and humanity and this existence and how does it really work. So we just draw the conclusion that some of the answers don't seem to be found within this slowly moving mainstream. So what do we then do? We look into the side streams and the tributaries to this main flow to find some answers there, because we're curious. And so you might say that people like me are taking in the whole river basin, if we are to continue that metaphor. And the ones with the blinkers are the ones who never dare to look above the safe riverbanks of this mainstream. But maybe this is just how things work. Maybe it's not possible to have it any other way. Maybe there has to be a mainstream, and there are a few people who are looking into the side streams, the tributaries, because, as we all know, who know a little bit about geography, that the tributaries to a mainstream, if they eventually run into the mainstream and broadens it and makes it bigger. And I guess that's what we call a paradigm shift. Thank you all. Love you guys. See you next time. If you like this video and other interviews and talks on Mind the Shift, please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate all the support. And you can follow Mind the Shift on Facebook and Instagram. And you can follow me, Anders Bolling, on all the main social media and also on medium.com. Thank you.